how effective it had been. It certainly did accomplish a lot in terms of opening doors, legislation, desegregation, access to public accommodations, voting rights, but it did not redistribute power. And the Black Power movement was an answer to this void of power. The other thing that happened, there are many things that happened that form the context of the milieu in which James Cone wrote. You might recall that in 1968, a year before the publication of Black Theology and Black Power, and can you hear me okay? The year before the publication of Black Power and Theology and Black Power was the assassination of Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence. And I remember that what happened to me on a personal level. I mean, I was just absolutely stunned and heartbroken with the assassination. I remember the night that it happened, what I was told. I really could not believe it. As much as I knew that there was a lot of racism in American society, I could not believe that he had been assassinated. And many Black people saw the assassination not as the work of a lone gunman, but the society itself had pulled the trigger. And we had questioned, where do we go from here? Because for our own understanding, Martin Luther King was the king of love. He was the prophet of nonviolence. Nina Simone sang a song that what's going to happen now that the king of love is dead? It was a profound question. And many of us raised the question, what is going to happen? Because King instilled in many of us hope and faith in America when we didn't have hope or faith in America. He would constantly quote from the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the great ideals upon which this nation was purportedly founded. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created, all men, it said, are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet Black people did not have the kind of means a lot of times to pursue happiness. But he believed in the soul of this country, that his ideals were important. And the question that all people had to raise, how do we work within the society? How do we strive to make those ideals real? So the assassination of Martin Luther King brought into the void, especially in his leadership, brought into that void great power in terms of the Black Power movement. Prior to this, for example, in 1966, there was in July 31st, a group of Black clergy that later became the National Committee of Negro Churchmen, and then the National Committee of Black Churchmen. And I think you remember Dr. Lopez, we hosted them, Alma Black Clergy in the Center, in 1969, when we heard James Cone speak. But they had said themselves, they were trying to figure out the relationship of Black theology and Black power. Can a Black power and Christianity, can Christianity, that many considered to be the religion of the oppressor, how could that sustain or be part of the Black Power movement? How could they relate to each other, or could they? Later on in one of his books, he talks about whether or not Black, I think it's the God of the Oppressed, whether or not Blacks can be both Christian, but Christian and Black. Mentioned earlier, Trinity, United Methodist Church. I don't know if you're there when Dr. Wright was there. One of the things that Jeremiah Wright talked about was being Black, unashamedly Black and Christian. He was also, I would say, one of my mentors, and I cherish that Dr. Jeremiah Wright very much. He was my advisor for my doctoral ministry program. So a brilliant man. But that was one of the questions. What was the relationship between Christianity and Black people? Because Christianity was seen by many as the religion of the oppressed. And that people buying into Christianity were buying into the slave master's religion, number one, and kept them docile, or thinking about pie in the sky by and by, of getting their rewards in heaven, and not struggling to live on earth in a way that is positive in terms of social justice, mercy, and those kinds of things. So So when King was assassinated and NCBC came into to question, the word was already out about Black Power and what is it meaning. Um, One of the books I remember reading was published also in 1968, and it was entitled Black Power, The Politics of Liberation. And it was written by then Stokely Carmichael, before he changed his name, Stokely Carmichael, and Hamilton, Charles Hamilton. And one of the insights from that book that stayed with me was the insight. There's an example where they talk about the fact that if somebody has their foot on my neck, it is my responsibility to determine how I'm going to get their foot off of my neck. They have no right to determine, to tell me how I must get their foot off my back, how I must resist. And part of this was saying that people have to determine themselves which way they're going to resist. It may be nonviolent, but there are situations when people have the absolute right to strike back violently. So that was part of the milieu also in which Cone found himself writing. Now, the year before um, James Cone published Black Theology and Black Power, there was another book that came out, and it was called The Black Messiah, and was written by Albert Clegg. In that book, Albert Clegg basically saw Jesus as a Black Messiah who had come to as a revolutionary community organizer, empowering the Black nation. Um, Also, um, in 1969, we had James Foreman, who was formerly of SNCC, who went down the aisle of Riverside Church with his Black Manifesto calling for reparations from white churches and synagogues for the benefits that they had received as a result of slavery in the United States and the aftermath of slavery in terms of all forms of discrimination. So he was one who really put that idea out there about reparations. So Cone was trying to respond to all of these things. And as a theologian, he had not found any of the major theologians dealing with these issues in terms of the Black condition. His point was, yes, you could talk about all kinds of things that were happening in the world, the Holocaust and so on, and that was very important. He was not knocking that. But his point was, right in front of you, you have this civil rights movement. You have people struggling for change, trying to become whole, and you're not dealing with it. And one of the ways that Black people was through the whole Black Power movement. And so he was trying to figure out how that related to his own theological background. Now, so he talked about, the God being the God of the oppressed, um, taking on the identity of the oppressed. And if God does not do that, then what's the need? He used three things, especially in the God of the oppressed. The Black theology of liberation. You look at the whole Exodus story, Exodus, the Sinai covenant. That was important to solidify the idea of God being for the oppressed. I'm going back and forth between the different books, not just looking at one or whatever. Some of the ideas have come forth from all of them. And that certainly this was true in the prophets. Again, King loved to quote Amos, that justice rolled down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And in the life of Jesus himself, as powerful indicators of the fact that God was the God of the oppressed. Now, what is very interesting is that these ideas were not totally new. Howard Thurman, in 1949, there's a publication, Jesus and the Disinherited. And in that, he talked about Jesus coming and relating to the oppressed. Why? Because he was oppressed himself, number one. He makes three identity points about Jesus. He was a Jew, he was a poor Jew, and he was a poor Jew under Roman oppression. And the question was, how does an oppressed person then relate to the oppressive reality, the oppressive environment? He deals with fear that all people have, especially oppressive fear, deception as a way of survival, and hatred, which comes out of no contacts with feelings and so on. And then talks about the love ethic as the way to go. But so again, so Cone picked up on, I think, some of Thurman's understanding, but again, Cone addressed not just individuals. How does an individual person respond to these kinds of things? But how do you respond to it as a people, as a racial group, as a racial identity? So it's not just his concern about the salvation of individual souls, but the deliverance of a people. And that God was a God who was there to help deliver the people from their oppression. So that is much of what Cone was about. And it's sort of a little context in which he did his writing. Let me stop there and ask you if there are any questions or responses before we go on, because I don't normally lecture. I don't normally lecture that long. So. But when we look at liberation theology, we go beyond Black theology. In liberation theology, one of the critical things about that, especially coming out of Latin America, the Latin American theologians, is the idea of the religion and the praxis, the theory and the praxis. You reflect. Many people have said, I remember when I was at Ohio University in campus ministry, there was a brother on campus, and he told me how much he really liked what we were doing, but needed to wait to get himself together before he could really join in some of the stuff we were doing. My point is, you can't get yourself together by yourself. It only comes through engagement with others. And what the liberation theologians said is that you have to have a praxis. It can't be just theoretical, okay? You've got to practice and then reflect, practice, reflect. They inform each other. What I do in my community comes as a result of my reflection, and then my reflection comes as a result of my involvement in community and what I learn there, what I see there. James Cone was actually, not everybody liked all the Cone said, of course. And there were two people who criticized it. One was his brother, Cecil, Cecil Cone, because he said that initially James still used the categories in the white academy, and he did an injustice to trying to put the Black religious experience to mold into those categories, okay? And that he needed to do, and Cone did. He did more of this in terms of, he actually wrote a book called The Blues and the Spirituals. And he did it in the Agalia Press, where he used African American reality as the basis for talking about theology. Not theology, or not even the Bible being the starting point, but the experiences of people, Black people themselves, and how that they are in dialogue, those experiences. So he would begin to use Coltrane, he used blues, he used various authors, artists, saying that they, like Langston Hughes and others, that they had as much to say about the experience as some of the theologians and some of the issues in the Bible. So James Cone was, and again, part of that was response to his brother Cecil. And the other critique was that Cone did not really talk about reconciliation, at least in his first book. And one of the responses there was that was not the purpose of his book, was to talk about reconciliation. He was really trying to talk about liberation, and that you cannot have reconciliation without justice first. Now, the other person one of the other people who criticized him was Charles Long, who just passed last year, who was a mentor actually of Jeremiah Wright at the University of Chicago, Divinity School. And Long's critique was that, again, the Black people emphasize experience, okay? The experience of God, the experience of each other, and that there was a problem in terms of extracting that experience into something abstract like theology. His point was that theology is a Western Christian approach to life. It is not indicative. If you go back to traditional African experience, if you go to Native experiences, they don't have these abstract concepts about God or life. They experience life and talk about their experiences. But the most important thing is the experience, okay, and not the abstract conversation about the experience that you put in categories that are acceptable in the academy. So those were critiques, and Cone tried to respond to those critiques again when he looked more in terms of his experience in the Black church. He talks about what happened in those worship experiences when people sang certain songs, even when they were otherworldly, how important that was for their survival.
Dr. Blake,
yes,
we do have a question. Diana?
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Diana.
This is wonderful. My name is Diana Scholl, and I'm a member of Ainsworth. And I'm so glad to hear you speaking on this topic. Thank you. I guess I have a question. I read James Cone back at Duke Divinity School back in, I would suspect it would be middle 80s. I can't remember quite. I kept his book for years because they had a strong Black church tradition within Duke Divinity School because of its Methodist background.
Right.
And so, of course, to have Black liberation theology taught in a Southern school was very consciousness raising, shall I say. And so I proceeded from Duke. At that time, I was in the Episcopal Church, and I went to Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, and it was blown out of the water and expanded through feminist liberation theology and mujerista theology. And my great mentor, who was Katie Cannon, who you must know, Katie, who of course has left us sadly, but her womanist theology, which was, she was a mentor and to so many of us in those years, from 88 to 91. And I wanted just to ask, because she really did bring up Black women's stories as the basis of theology. So that it was not theoretical, like you're saying, but it really went back down deeper into the grassroots of the Black experience. And I wonder how you see Cone sort of in relation to that, or you have comments about how Katie's work really did change things.
Yes, there was one of the other critiques of Cone's work, that he did not include Black women. It was from a Black male understanding. And I think there are reasons for that, because at that time, that's what, the society is so patriarchal, okay? And I think that he was dealing with the fact that Black men had also been so disenfranchised. In a patriarchal society, one of the problems with Black men was the fact that in a patriarchy, the Black man is supposed to hold a certain position. The man is supposed to be dominant, control, you know. And in America, because of the racism, Black men were not even able to be patriarchal. Not so that they should have been, but they could not. Okay, so they could not even carry on responsibilities in the house and so on. But women did critique him, rightly so. And he actually began to help. He helped in terms of the womanish critique. There were other points of view because, first of all, he came up with Black theology, and then we had the feminist movement. So he helped to birth those movements, the feminist movement, and then many Black women said, well, the feminist movement doesn't speak totally to us either. Black theology doesn't because of the male-centric nature of it, and neither is feminist theology. So the starting point has to be the experiences of Black women, okay? And those experiences are related to both being a woman in a society and being Black. They are still different and unique. And we have to begin starting there. So Katie Cannon and many others picked that up. But Cone was after the critique, and this is one of the things I would say about Cone. Cone grew after the critique. He started talking about womanist theology. And I will also say that his work helped with the liberation theology movement. It helped with the feminist movement, the womanist movement, what now is called queer theology, or that movement. And he was very supportive. So he grew I think one of my most powerful experiences with Cone was at the AAR, Academy of Religion, American Academy of Religion, when he met in Montreal some years ago. And he was being interviewed by Cornel West, not Cornel West. Oh, the other one. The great theologian, not Cornell. The Marxists. Anyway, maybe it's anyway. But the question was what came about. The question was, Cone started talking about his own experience growing up segregated in Arkansas and how he wanted to write and he couldn't write. And he was very hard on himself because he said, look at James Baldwin. He only had a high school education and look at the way he writes. And I want to be able to write like that. And so he kept driving himself to perfect that kind of his style and so on. So it was that kind of always evaluating himself that was very, very important to him. So he did grow. And yes, you're very right. He was very, Katie Cannon and so many others have really not only benefited from Cone's scholarship, but they have taken it and deepened it in terms of their own experience. And they have, as Cone said, talked about their own experiences as the starting point for their theology, womanist theology. I sometimes think that I have some affinity for Cecil Cone's critique, and Charles Long's, because I do think that theology is a Western Christian concept, and it can sometimes not denigrate, but in a sense, I think some experiences cannot be easily put into theological categories and perhaps should not be put into theological categories. What I mean by if you experience something, you experience it. And sometimes when you try to explain it, you lose the essence of the experience. Okay? And the essence of the experience is just so absolutely important. So for example, I can read a Langston Hughes poem and just get and feel as a deeper sense of holiness as I would by reading somebody's theology. So. Is there another question? Did I respond to that adequately?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other?
You're muted.
That's my content comes across better when I'm muted.
Mine too.
Do you want to continue or with the questions, Dorsey? It's up to you.
Well, let's see. How much?
Or do you prefer to be interrupted when there is a question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see how people are feeling right now. What are your thoughts? It doesn't have to be a question. What are your thoughts?
Jill.
Well, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Rationality within liberation theology.
Mm-hmm.
Where does it fit?
Rationality?
Yes.
Say more of what you mean by rationality.
Facts, things that you can measure.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. That's a great question. It really is. I'll first respond with Albert Clegg. A fact that Albert Clegg put forth and come to was the identity of God, the racial identity, And one fact that he put together was, of course, that Jesus was not in the place where he was born white. So that's an initial fact. He was a person we would call a person of color. Now, that's difficult for many people to hear. And that was part of his own legacy, his own understanding, and his own work. When you talk about facts and rationality, what Cone would say is that the proof is in the experiences of Black people, the rationale. The fact that many people believe that God was the God of oppressed, and God had, in fact, delivered people, not only the Israelites or the Hebrews from oppression, that is, from his point, a fact, but also that it did deliver so many Black people out of bondage. Now, you're getting into the fact of, which is maybe people might argue, the fact of the cross and the lynching tree. The fact that the lynching tree did exist, the fact that there was a cross, okay, and that on the cross you also see the fact that God was with Jesus, all the way, and the fact that there was this kind of this very negative concept in terms of lynching, that it was a public spectacle, that people came to see it, they had picnics. This is part of the reality of American society. So, and he outlined that in many ways how people were oppressed, the facts of oppression economically for Black people. So those were some of the facts that were part of his understanding of Black theology. You could document the oppression. King did a lot of that. You could document the oppression, and you could also document, in terms of their own life stories, how God had moved with people to bring about a sense of liberation and change, beginning with the Hebrews and through the Black experience of slavery, bringing people through, and even in the present society.
Thanks. Jill had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know that I'm going to quite word this question the way that I want to in my head. I'm having a hard time formulating the words, but I guess on the topic of experience versus theology, what you were discussing before, I guess I'm curious from your perspective, if you have a sense that Cone took that more theological approach, which he was criticized for, because it was the way that he authentically wanted to express his own truth and his own findings, or if there was some level of a need for validation.
Yes, I think he was part of the academy, okay? And he wanted to teach people about Black religion and so on, and he had to go through certain hoops in theological education. So he was part of the academy, and he had to use theological language that was acceptable in the academy. So I think that's part of it. When I was at Ohio University, for example, there was a student, Arab student, but he's from Peru, and he was a master's student. And when I asked him if he was going on to study for his PhD, he said no. I said, well, why not? You're brilliant. He said, because every time I write a paper, and these are my thoughts, they always ask me, how do you document that? Who said that? And his point is, I said it. This is my understanding. But the point is, no. You have to have footnotes on your paper. You got to document this kind of thing. And he kept saying, I can't document. These are things that whatever. And so he said, I can't continue with that. You might know from womenist history and our academies and so on, the meaning of the women, when they first started publishing, okay, their works were not accepted for tenure because they were not published in the legitimized journals, the journals that the white male professors had said were legitimate. The same thing was true with Black women, Angela Davis and these kind of people. What they were publishing was not seen as academic. So I think part of what he was doing, he wanted to be part of the academy, he wanted to teach in the academy, and therefore he had to speak in language that the academy could accept. So I think there's a lot of it. For the reason I'm saying this, for example, my mother, if you had said to my grandmother, what is your theology? She would not have known what you were talking about. She was, And even growing up as in the 60s, my people, my father's church, right, would not have known what theology was. Although once he went to school and they could pick up those terms, but they would not. They could tell you what God had done in their lives. They could tell about their religion, but the concept of theology was basically an alien concept. You can start talking about what do you think about the world or worldview or whatever, but theology was not a concept that a lot of us grew up with. And so, and that was the critique from his brother, that you sort of moved away from the experience to try to validate yourself or validate white folks, and you use language and concepts that are alien to our experience. So in many ways, you're not being authentic, with our experiences. So that was the critique.
Yeah, and maybe even, I mean, it sounds like it would pose challenges to even connecting with the intended audience.
Yes. And there was a question, but he was writing in terms of the theology. He said his audience was the Black community too. In fact, in Black theology, he says, this is mine, whatever. But it would have been a very highly educated Black community. Mm-hmm. It would have to be broken down, as we would say, to Black people on the streets. Mm-hmm. It's just like, not just like, Afrocentricity was a concept that was developed in the academy by people like Molefi Kete Asante and others. People who are not part of the academy then started saying, I'm Afrocentric and blah, 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 and so on. But their understanding of that was not what the academy had first thought about, how it first defined Afrocentricity, okay? Mm-hmm. It's more than just wearing African clothes. It's more than just, it has to do with the whole way of looking at life and educating oneself. It doesn't demean Eurocentricity, but it says there are other ways to look at, for example, in Afrocentricity, you don't study just for the sake of studying. You study out of the need of how is this going to empower my people? How is this going to help me to live and transform my community? That's sort of the Afrocentric approach. And so it's taking knowledge and applying it immediately, or you even begin the search for knowledge with the understanding that I'm doing this on the behalf of my people.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
Marvin.
Okay. Yeah, what you're describing in terms of Cone really being in conversation with other theologians and pushing within the boundaries of that field, very much in the way that, folks in education and the law, for example, are doing with critical race theory or other discourses that they're very insular in a way because it's scholars kind of speaking to each other about the field and trying to expand the conversation, and then thinking about how that applies, right, to the human condition. And so it's a very common thing among Black radical leftist scholars, and Cone was really one such figure. But I think what you just described helps me to understand maybe what I would refer to as it's somewhat obscure, I think, within the Black church, which I've been a part of all my life, right? And I didn't hear about or learn about James Cone until I went to Trinity UCC, right. And then right. a little bit at Columbia. But so it is not necessarily something that is, the discourse isn't widespread among Black folk. And that, although I think a lot of the principles, right, are things that we practice in terms of the activism and those kinds of things. But I'd love to hear you also kind of link it a little bit to Martin Luther King in terms of his approach and I think sort of how many of us see him in our lives today.
Yes, I think that Martin Luther King, if I can use the word, was a Black theologian before Cone. The word just was not used. That's part of my point. I think that Howard Thurman was, in a sense, before Cone too, but that was not the word that they used because, again, they were not using those categories of the white academy. But Martin Luther King's whole life was committed to empowering people. And he also carried with him a deep understanding of reconciliation, again, which is part of the critique of Cone, which Cone did not have, at least in his initial offerings. I think many people, well, let me just give you a good example of Dr. Thurman. Luther King. I don't think I've told very many people this. Huh. Well, anyways, I was talking with Dr. Thurman one day, and he said he knew what a lot of the young black scholars were doing, trying to calling him a theologian. And they were doing that because he wrote 20 some books, and you've got Tillich and all these people, and why not push Thurman as a theologian and whatever? And he's basically said that's okay if they want to do that, you know. But that was not where he was coming. He did not really see himself in that light. He said, I see myself, I had just always been a seeker. Okay? A seeker of God, my life, trying to see what is it, you know, that I am to do and to be, and what is authentic in me. And I think King was the same way. King was a person who was trying to not say I'm a theologian or whatever, but what is the pain I'm feeling in my community? What is the discrimination? How can I address that pain from my own self, which is a self infused with religion? I am the grandson of a preacher, this kind of thing. I've gone to theological seminary. I believe in the essence of the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And how can I use that with the method of Gandhi, you know, to speak to the needs of my people? Now, if you want to call that whatever he came up with in terms of his understanding of God and life, if you want to call that theology, fine. And many people have now. Their whole thing is about King's theology. And I think he would probably not be opposed to it, but that's not the way he saw himself, okay, as a theologian. He was a preacher, a Black preacher primarily, and a leader, a human rights leader.
Beth, you had a question. Beth?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the unmute. Thank you so much. This has been great. I was just thinking about your experience. We're talking about experience sort of in an abstract way, but I'm just curious, Dorsey, what has been your experience around applying Dr. Thurman and Dr. Cone's work to your own life and your role as an academic and also, you know, as a pastor? And I just love to hear about how you've embodied his work, their work, I should say. And Katie Cannon too, all of it. Yeah.
I think there had been, I would say, one of the most influential people in terms of my going into ministry. And I'm not sure I would be in ministry if not for Dr. King. I met Dr. King my junior year in college at Brown University. And it was just a couple of weeks after he had spoken at Riverside Church with his Beyond Vietnam speech. And he used a lot of that in this presentation. I'll say, first of all, it was one of those experiences. I was ushering, and at the back of the chapel, or the sales hall actually was. And I looked at my watch and said, oh, he's late. So where's Martin Luther King? I mean, he's late. What's wrong with him? And then all of a sudden, from the back of it, there came this energy that just enveloped me. I mean, it was just like, and I looked around and it was Dr. King. And then he spoke from the moment, and when he spoke, it reminded me of being in the temple in the year the King Uzziah died. I saw that is the experience I felt with him in the chapel. And it appeared as that he was 10 feet tall or filled up. And after the service was over, I went to meet him. And the shocking thing was, I went, oh, he's a little dude. He's only 5'7". I see shorter than I am. You know, but he had he had unleashed this great power, this great energy. And I talked with him about, I was working and trying to decide if I wanted to go and to be a conscious objector. And he had talked about that in his speech. And as a result of that, I said I would do that. And in fact, an opportunity I missed, he told me that because we had a little chance to talk, that if I wanted to send whatever my statement about conscious objection to him, he would read it and sort of get back. Because I told him I'm Baptist, Black Baptist, and I don't know what we've got about anti-war and conscious objection. I don't think we got anything along those lines. So I'm going to have to come up with something different. So, and I just got busy. And as you know how students are, you get busy at the last minute. I had to send the thing in. So I just sent it in to Kansas City or whatever and so on. But he empowered me with the fact that what happened with that, they sent back a 2S deferment. And I said, I don't want a 2S deferment because this is part of King. That's because there are people who can't go to school, who don't have the means or whatever. Why should I be deferred when they have to face the problem of going to Vietnam or not, this kind of thing. But anyway, it said, take the 2S, shut up, we're not going to deal with this. And Dr. Thurman was a similar experience in terms of meeting him. There was also something that happened with him when I walked right past him. And this was at the center, Hector. And it's like Dr. Williams had told me that I was going to do an independent study on Howard Thurman. As he had suggested, Dr. Williams, a mentor, and I go, who is Howard Thurman? He said, you don't know who Howard Thurman is? I go, no. How should I know who Howard Thurman is? And so he told me about Howard Thurman. He was at Boston University when Howard Thurman was there. Okay. And so he gave me the phone number. So I called and set an appointment to see him at 9 o'clock that Saturday. So I went over, drove my car and parked and went in to see him. And he lived at 2020 Stockton, 2020 Stockton in San Francisco. And there was a sign to punch all 3 bells. Okay. And so I did. And this elderly Black gentleman came to the door and said, hello, whatever. And I said, I am Dorsey Blake. I have an appointment with Dr. Thurman. He said, come right in. And I walked right on past him. I was looking for Dr. Thurman. And then all of a sudden, again, I felt this thing going. So I turned and said, are you Dr. Thurman? He goes, yes. So we sat down and we talked. And there's another experience. I shouldn't tell you all this experience, but there was another. So he invited me to the church the next day. He was preaching. He was no longer the pastor, but he was preaching. So I went and sat on the last row. That's the only place I could. The place was packed. And after the service was over, I went to him to tell him how important the service was. And he said, I guess throughout the service, I was sort of like this in my seat, like. And he said, well, yes. He said, well, I was wondering when you were going to come up for air. You know? And he was like that. He could tell there's experience where a person heard him speak and wanted to talk with him and he couldn't because the line was too long. And he went another time and heard him speak, and that time went to talk with him and say how much he enjoyed it. And Dr. Thurman remembered him. White from. Oh yes, I remember you. You were sitting over in the corner, and he was just shocked that Thurman remembered him. But in terms of their influence on me, is this part of my understanding of the Cone and Dr. Thurman? I liked Cone. I thought Cone was very important when I first read him, and I was glad that he shook up the theological world because I was trying to shake it up too. Because when I went to PSR, there were no Black professors, there were no Black courses. That's why the Center for Urban Black Studies and Hector and Dr. Whitmer were so important. It was the only place you could go to where you could talk about your own experiences religiously. So I appreciate that about Cone. I appreciated Cone in terms of dealing with an oppressed people. but it was Thurman who spoke to my deepest need. Because I guess at that point, I did need that inward journey. I did need that going deep within inside of myself to find out who I really was. Years later, I worked with him at his Howard Thurman Trust. This is when I was doing PhD work, whatever. And he said something that's very important to me. One day, it made me angry when I first read it, because he left a little note on my desk. And when I read the note, it said something to the effect, you are so busy, you are so involved in the world, you have so many activities. I wonder if you ever take time to deal with your soul, with who you really are. And I'm going, he's got a nerve to say that about me, and I'm here working for his blah, 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 blah. And then I stopped and I said, oh, he's got a point. I am scattered all over the place doing all these things and not taking time for myself. So from that point of view, that's one of the things that I incorporated after that in terms of my own ministry. But we must take time for ourselves, because you can't replenish, you can't do your work in the world without some kind of discipline in yourself, and without taking time off to refresh yourself, without some kind of a meditative practice. It's just absolutely essential to sustaining yourself for the long run. It is a very difficult lesson to learn, and you learn it and then you forget it and you get involved. But just today, I remembered, because I've been getting a lot of kind of invitations recent, and one came today, and I just said I could not do that because it's just too much. And I just said, I love the organization, but I cannot join your board. That's what it at this point, because I was feeling so I can't give my best with all that I'm doing right now. I can't give my best to be on a board. And I don't join boards to just have my name on the board. If I'm going to be on the board, I want to be involved with the organization and have responsibility for the organization and accountability to the organization. So that's one of the things that Thurman has helped me in terms of my own life, to really make sure that I am disciplined and follow. What King has done for me is his example is something that he gave his life to the cause of freedom and justice. And I feel as though I could do no less. What happened to me when I met him in Brown, when I said I think he led me to ministry, was there was connection that was made between him and me. It was like he was a prophet, one of the Old Testament prophets, and there was a radiance about him. And from that time, I knew that whatever I did with my own life had to be consistent with what he was trying to do, to try to help in some kind of way the overall movement that he was about. And I wasn't sure it was ministry at that time. I thought it might be community organizing. I thought at one point of Peace Corps, these kinds of things, but I knew it had to be committed to helping make this world a better place for all of us to live. It had to be about breaking down barriers between people. It had to be about trying to somehow manifest justice in my own life. So those are the ways that King and Thurman influenced me in my own ministry. And I tried to, the other thing that Thurman did, about 15 years ago, my little hometown in Liberty, Missouri is where I grew up. I was born in Kansas City, grew up in Liberty, Missouri, then moved back to Kansas City for 3 years. Again, my father was a minister. And they asked us, I was considered one of their success stories. And my brother Carl and I were considered success stories. And there was a panel of 4 of us. And when it came to me, I was the last person. I said that I don't know if I'm successful. I think with my background degrees and so on, if you want to look at success in terms of material possessions, I'm not sure I'm all that successful. in terms of recognition, I am not sure I'm successful. I said the only measure I have of success for me personally is that I believe that I have been successful in trying to follow the light that has been shown on my path, trying to follow the truth that I have experienced. That's the only success. I can honestly say I have tried. And what Dr. Thurman did for me was one of his favorite statements was, there are a couple. What is true in religion is true because it's true. So this is not theological. This is not the theological thing again. What is true in religion is true because it's true. And that freed me to find truth in poetry, in prose, or whatever. And it also allowed me, therefore, to go beyond or outside the Bible in terms of finding my truth. And so that's what I always try to do, is to find truth. Thurman also helped me with the spiritual and explaining one of the spirituals. He has a great book, two actually. One is the Negro Spiritual, Speaks of Life and Death, and the other one is Deep River. In Deep River, he looks at several of the spirituals. And one of the spirituals he looks at is We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder, I think. And he talks about at the ladder, the angels going up and down. And at the top of the ladder, he says it's Jehovah himself. And Jehovah asks this question, Jacob and of each of us. And the question is, how have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? And that has been, a guide, and it's been, I don't mean indictment in a negative way, but I have to keep thinking, have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? Have you been authentic? To getting back to the very beginning, where I talked about Thurman being hearing the sound of the genuine and leading you home to your authentic self. That has been, how have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? That's how the two of them have influenced me in my own ministry. And so that's allowed me to be bold, if that's what I see to be my truth. And it is what I have tried to embody at our church. Again, for example, the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples started in 1944, the first interracial interfaith church in America. And that's something that we say we're proud of, but we shouldn't be in a way. Because again, here's Cone. That's an indictment of Christianity. Why did it take so long? Why? 1944, to fully intentionally integrate the churches. Why? And that's one of the things he was trying to get in terms of the nature of what he called white Christianity. Why did it take so long? And the question we ask is not your theology, whatever, but the idea is to bring people together from all backgrounds, all national, all genders, all classes, whatever, with the idea that if we gather together and have significant religious experiences over a significant time period, there will emerge between us a sense of common ground that would undercut all the divisions that are imposed upon us by the social realities. So that has been, and it has been for me, this authenticity, how I try to approach teaching, is to try to embody the sense that we are community. In all of our classes, we strive to be, certainly by the end of the semester, a community which is open and loving, where we support each other, where we don't compete for grades, this kind of thing, but we hold each other in a very, very special place. So that's how they both influenced me in terms of being inclusive and trying to hear the cries of those who are crying, to respond to my own cry when I realize that I am not where I want to be at times or need to be, and to address that through discipline, spiritual disciplines and resources. So.
Thank you. I could listen to you all day, all night. Diana, do you have another brief question?
Yeah, I think it is kind of brief. Thank you. So thank you so much for your talk and your reflections. I too could listen to you forever. But I'm wondering what you think about where we are in this moment. Like, where is uh, the Black church and Black theologians, whether they call themselves that or not? What are they thinking? Where do they need to go? What needs to happen now? I'm so glad you mentioned Jeremiah Wright, because I still think of how horrified I was when certainly the white supremacists in politics forced Barack Obama to separate himself from Jeremiah Wright, which is just, I just can't even say how horrible that was to me.
Thank you. I agree with you.
Yeah, but I just wonder, you're someone who this is your life. I've been out of the academy for some time, but who should I be reading? Who is it where are we moving forward now?
Okay. I think one place to look would be Black Lives Matter. They're a secular group, and yet they're doing prophetic work. When they first started, I think a lot of people understood, but they have brought to the attention of people like no other group recently what is happening in our society, the pain. And when they say Black Lives Matter, I mean, certainly when people say, well, all lives matter, which is true. All lives do matter. And at the church, every year we have a service, um, a Transgender Day of Remembrance, because transgender people are being killed. And it's just amazing, at least 2 a month, just because they're transgender, this kind of thing. But what they're trying to say is that for so many years, this has been happening. This brutality, police brutality, is now visible. And look at who's being killed. Black people, Black people. So, and they're saying their lives do matter. When you kill, you're taking away somebody from a community, from loving relationships, and so on. So those lives do matter. Now, based upon that, now, and other people can also say these other lives do matter too. But Black Lives Matter has been a group that, as a result of their understanding what has happened in this society, there are something like 60 countries that have had Black Lives Matter protests or demonstrations. And why? All over Europe. Because in some of the colonized people, colonized by European nations, are saying they have experienced the same thing. And they are now feeling and being emboldened to talk about what their colonizers have done to them. And they are taking some kind of, they are taking leadership in trying to regress grievances that they have. So I think Black Lives Matter is something to look at and to be very serious about what they're trying to do. And I think there are some people from various, I think a lot of the interfaith groups, some of them are doing a lot of good work. I think that is a tool. We no longer can talk about this just being a Christian nation. I'm sorry. There are so many religious groups out there that we've got to learn to live with and support. For example, I'm so glad that Biden has said he's going to reverse his Muslim ban. I was so shocked when that happened because I know so many Muslims, brothers and sisters, and we have such kindred spirits. That is shocking. So I think a lot is happening in some of the interfaith groups. And I think that also some of the young poets and some of the authors, young authors, have a lot to say. They tend to be truthful, more truthful from their perspective in terms of what's happening and not necessarily caring about the reactions that people have, but they see that it's their truth that must come forth. So I think I'm very optimistic. That sounds strange with what happened on the 6th of January, because I'm optimistic because although you had 75,000 for voting for whatever, never before, when we look at recent years, never before have so many people, millions of people, come out against war, I am shocked at how many people have come out trying to support Black Lives Matter. Remember Colin Kaepernick a few years ago when he took a knee because of the racist national anthem, refusing to, and he was vilified, kicked out of the NFL, still cannot get a job in the NFL. But this past summer, how many athletes took knees? How many corporate people took knees and put Black Lives Matter signs out and talked about this? To me, we're on the verge of something that could be quite remarkable if we had the right leadership. This is a crisis period, but it's also a period of opportunity that we need to look at very seriously. And I think the new administration is certainly much better than what we did have. And I think what we did have actually helped us to see how awful things were. You know, I'm glad it's no longer there. But this is an opportunity for us to begin to build the kind of society that we need. In addition to Black Lives Matter, I'm with for example, the National Council of Elders. And one of the things that we did this year, we tried to meet with some of the young activists across the nation, because a lot of them were not going to vote. And I can understand that because I'm basically a third party person myself. But we said, no, we got to remove this person from office. There's so much evil coming. You have to remove that. Okay. But in the process of that, we found out how brilliant some of these young organizers are. And they don't use necessary, not all of them are going to come to church. And we have to recognize that, but many of them are very spiritual. And so we have to understand that. So I think the church may look very different. And of course, it is going to look very different because we've all had to experience this COVID thing. And all of our churches are different from what they were. And maybe we can learn from that in terms of how do we do church. It's going to be done differently. But I'm amazed at our youth, and what the National Council of Elders tries to do is to meet with young people so we can share each other's wisdom. I'm not saying the wisdom of older people to share with the younger people. No, it's reciprocity, because they're teaching us a lot too, especially with their technical knowledge and abilities and different ways of communicating and so on. So I think I'm hopeful. I am very hopeful. And we have to have hope. And it's a hope that's not hocus pocus hope, but it's hope built on historical realities. To go back to the question about rationality and rational thinking, throughout our history, we have evidence of the movement of God in the community. We have evidence of the fact that change can come about. When we're celebrating the bicentennial, Thurgood Marshall, who was, former Supreme Court justice, said the genius of American society is not the Constitution, it's not blah, blah, blah. And King says this too. The genius is that people have struggled to make the Constitution what it ought to be, to make the nation what it ought to be. King said that too. All these social movements have been movements to try to usher into reality these ideals. And so you have the ideals, we're far from the ideals, but more and more people, I think, are organizing to make the ideals real. And we're crossing boundaries, not just United States, people all across the world are rising up against oppression. And I'm excited about that. I'm very, very hopeful. I don't think we're going to move backward. I don't. I think we have to move forward because of the energy I'm feeling, the perceptions I'm hearing, the analysis I'm feeling, and the commitment I'm feeling from a lot of people. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on, but I'm not sure we're ready to end, but you might be tired. But it's great to hear you. And I hope this isn't the last time.
I hope it's not the last time too.
Okay.
I would say, I enjoy you. I have enjoyed you so much. I would love to do it again sometime if you would like to. I mean, I don't want to push you, but I would love to.
Maybe we should put him on in February too. What do you think?
That'd be great.
Okay,
I would love to do something around Black history. Okay.
right. We will, we'll talk to you more about details and dates, but that would be wonderful.
Save the
I
date,
am
save the date, Dorsey, because my third memorial service is coming up.
the what?
My third memorial service is coming up.
You
The
came to
third-
the second one.
What's that?
You came to a second one. That was his retirement. The
Yes.
first one was the installation here that was 2 days long or whatever.
I was
No.
trying to figure out what.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, he doesn't do
But-
anything small.
No. But that is also an example of when I want people to know when Hector retired, and his point is, don't give me these dinners and fancy things. I'm going to go out the way I came in, dealing with the issue of race.
Cecil, I'm going to ask you, what did you put in here? In the chat
Amanda-
box?
Amanda Gorman's
Is
poem.
that her poem? I didn't get to read it all. Okay, but
Yeah.
we can't, how do we save it?
You can save the chat.
How? I've never been able to.
Well,
It's not all there though, Cecil.
no, it's not.
Oh,
Oh,
You can find it out on
okay, I
online.
will,
And
because
you-
I do want it. I thought that was it, but I wasn't sure.
Well, Dorsey, do you want to hang out for a second or two, or some people might have to take leave, but what about you? I know your bedtime used to be about what, 7:30?
I have a brother who goes to bed at 7:30. I'm in Memphis, but I'm here.
I didn't ask your permission, but I remembered a little late, but I started recording this because one of our members couldn't be here. A couple of them couldn't,
Oh,
and I said I would record it. That's okay
that's-
with you, isn't it?
that's fine.
That's what I thought.
What percentage would you request, though?
Yeah. Royalty.
Thank you.
Okay.
But anybody want to hang out
I
and
think
talk a little
before
bit?
people leaving.
Yeah, some will, because they're, you know.
I think I need to go. Thank you
okay,
so much. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Turn
we'll do it
into
again.
pumpkins. Some of us turn into pumpkins, but we don't. We stay up late.
Well,
Marvin, we're gonna
I wake up at 4, so I need to go.
I know
Ooh,
you
wake
turn
at
it. I
4,
wasn't
my
gonna
God.
say that, Cecil, but I was thinking of you.
And I still have to take a walk, so
Oh.
literally.
At this time of the evening?
I
Oh,
know it's later than I prefer, but I've been going the whole day without stopping. So
where do
I
you
have-
walk? How
Is
far do you
that
walk?
is that a euphemism for like taking your pet out for a walk?
no, I take myself out for a walk.
Oh, that's
Add-
wonderful.
A good amount of weight. Wait till you see me. You'll be surprised.
All right, all right.
So that's how I've done it.
Thank you.
Marvin, thank
Thank you, Dr. Blake.
you.
Thank you,
so
Dr. Blake.
much.
And I'm gonna have to go, guys.
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Blake,
everybody.
I wanna say, I said earlier that you were going to elevate the conversation, and you did just that. I mean, it was
Okay.
really enriching. It was deep. It was substantive, and it really made us think. And so, thank you
Oh,
very
thank
much.
you very much.
wonderful.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good walk, Marvin.
Yeah,
I'll
have a
talk
good
to you.
night. And Eldon is gone. He's on a phone, but
Oh,
he
he just asked the fist.
he
up.
said he
Like,
might come back, but he won't be back in time. But I told him, oh,
Oh,
there he is. We're just.
I missed it all, didn't I?
Yeah, but I recorded, so.
Okay, great.
We're just about to sign off. but,
Oh, well, thank you very much for coming, Dr. Blake and
Oh,
Hector, Lynn. Thanks for setting this up for us. This is really great.
We're
Now,
it's
gonna-
my honor.
Eldon,
We're,
Yeah.
if you hang in there, Dorsey and I are gonna talk about some really, really bad stuff now, that we know.
You're going to get down now.
Yeah, yeah.
Now it's good. Now we really hear the stories.
Yeah.
All right.
yeah, but, and he's gonna come back probably with us in February too.
Oh, good. Good. Well, thank you so much and I gotta say, whoever wrote the welcome email for that one, it was so warm. I couldn't not, I really, I was touched. So,
Marvin did
thanks.
that.
Well, I'll appreciate him too. Thank you for including me.
Sure.
Dr.
Oh,
Blake,
great.
great to meet
Thank-
you. Thank you so
thank-
much. Gave me a lot
Thank
to
you for
think
the
about.
invitation. Take care.
All right.
everyone.
Take
Right,
care.
Elvin.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Well, Mr.
Well,
Blake,
thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, for the invitation to be with you tonight. I love your group.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we had no idea how many would join. When we first started this gathering last summer, when Black Lives Matter thing really rose up, people were saying, we got to do something. So we had about 25 for several weeks. And then, you know how it goes,
Right.
then it
Right.
kind of petered down to a small group. And tonight was a little bigger, but I thought there would be more actually, because I had more interest of people asking me about it. But, you know,
But-
they get busy.
you know, what started off was the energy. I think they were looking at Proxus and the excitement, the
Yeah.
possibility. And then some people wanted to venture into the theology,
Right.
the structure of it.
That's what Marvin wanted.
And that's when we started seeing people fall off, because you're right.
Some people wanted to do more. Yeah.
Most of us are not academicians, you know, we
Right.
we like to get our hands dirty. But yeah, they came back. A lot of them came back, and it's really fun. Dorsey, I've never heard you like this, you know? Well, because I have never let us talk about stuff like this.
And I have to tell you, you really put into words what I've felt for a very long time, because I came from being a special ed teacher into
Mhm.
seminary, and I was lost in seminary. I was bored to death with the books. I was falling asleep. And it wasn't until I read Cone's God of the Oppressed that I didn't even think I belonged in seminary.
Right.
And but really where I learned the most was from the folk that I pastored, especially in my first church in LA. And it was Hector's former church, South Central LA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they, you know, their faith and what they've been through and what they talked to me about, and it was not heady theology by any means, because they had no education really. But I got so much more out of that in my faith, deepened so much from theirs. And so what you were saying about
Yeah.
experience and not head has always been where I've come from in the way of church and faith.
Well, you guys are way beyond me, so, you know, let's keep it simple. How are the Raiders doing, Dorsey?
Well, you know, the Raiders have left.
Oh.
Yep.
They're now, see how far back they're in Las Vegas.
Vegas. Yeah, oh, he knows.
Hey,
He's still a Raiders fan.
Is your brother doing concerts, online concerts?
He hasn't for a while. They were, but then he hasn't for a while.
His brother, Carl, is an incredible.
In fact, we've had problems. We're still working on trying to get the music right for our Zoom conferences. We're getting there. We haven't gone the route yet that you talked about in terms of the fiber optics.
Oh.
But we tried something last week. We're going to try again Sunday to see if it's a little bit better, because it is so distorted. And
yeah, it can.
And there are places where it's just, and I know for him and for me, I just hate hearing it because it's just so.
Yeah.
But it's getting better. So I think we're at a point of.
Marvin didn't say anything, of course, but Marvin Lynn, the man who you know was in on starting this, he was a classically trained singer, and he has the most beautiful voice. He can sing opera, he can sing classical, he can sing spirituals and gospel. And
has he recorded at all?
I think he has some, but I'm not sure. We have some videos that we've used that he's done, but I don't know if he's done any professional ones.
Okay.
He may have a while back. He was kind of humble about it, but he's the dean of the Graduate School of Education of PSU.
Portland State University.
And we we ran across him because he was a speaker, keynote speaker for the MLK service that I'm part of, the Albina Ministerial Alliance, mostly Black Church Alliance. And he was the speaker, and our choir person, Cynthia, who was on, was asked to lead the music. And then she heard that he was a singer, so she made him come up and help lead with her. And then I went up and invited him to be a preacher at our church. He was our preacher for Faith Formation Sunday. And then after that, he started coming and he joined.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, he's a gift.
Oh, yeah. I love his spirit. I really did.
Oh, yeah. He's very, very smart. Very, very smart. So, well, my gosh. It was so good, Dorsey. I kept, going back in time. Particularly every time you mention Howard Thurman, and that's just incredible.
Hey, did you ever run across Cornish Rogers?
Yes, Cornish spoke for us. Remember, Hector? He taught a class on the book of Revelation.
Yep.
He was my mentor. He was
is that
my
right?
California father, actually, because I worked for him at seminary, and I first met him when he and his wife and son went with, he led the trip to Central America that I went on in seminary.
I didn't know that.
And then he hired me to be his assistant. I didn't do anything but got paid. And then, but I became very close to he and his family. And he was my California family.
And he used to write for the Christianity in Crisis or the
He
Christian
was
Century?
Christian Century.
Christian Century.
He was editor of Christian Century. He taught at Claremont for his last many years after his editor time.
He's the one responsible for getting this one connected to me.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Cornish?
Well, for me taking the church, because I went, actually, he didn't want me to take it. He didn't think they'd be interested in me, but they advertised. He was in charge of urban ministry placement for seminary. And I went to him and said, well, because I was trying all kinds of things to get an internship, and I wanted something different, a cross-cultural experience. And I said, I think I want to go for this one at Emmanuel. What about this? He goes, oh, they won't want you. You're not Black, you're not brown, you don't speak Spanish. And then he said, but I said, well, I'd still like to look into it. So he said, well, I'll contact Hector Lopez. He wants to come and meet with any seminarians that are interested. And
that's great.
Yeah, Cornish.
That is great.
In fact, he came up here and preached at my installation here.
Oh.
Probably preached at my installation in Emmanuel too, I think. Or he did the call.
He
did my call. That was my when I was ordained. He preached at my ordination, but he came up here for my installation.
Right.
Yeah.
We had some great people that came to the center, and Cornish Rogers is one of them.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man.
Yeah. I just read something the other day. It was some service. Oh, we were looking for a sermon that Dr. Thurman preached in the process. I saw something with George Thomas's name on it. Remember him, Hector?
Who?
George Thomas.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he's still alive.
No, I don't know. This was a long time ago. I just saw his name on something.
Oh.
About him, yeah.
No,
there are not many still alive. Mass Jackson, I think, passed on. I know Major.
Well, Hirschfeld was one of the first to go.
Yeah.
He's a Lutheran pastor.
He is the one who is responsible for my going to Alabama, actually.
Seriously, he's Missouri Lutheran, Black pastor.
Because he was a pastor in Tuscaloosa after the Lutherans had been, and he knew King. He had worked with Martin Luther King, blah, 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 blah. But he also knew the chair of the religious studies department.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, they were close, Joe Bettis. And Bettis told him that one of the things he wanted to do was to integrate school by going through the religious studies department, which he chaired because he had like it. And so he asked Hirschfeld if he knew anybody. And Hirschfeld asked Haziah, and Haziah said, "You're the one to do this." And I'm going, but I've had no teaching.
Oh, really? You didn't want to teach?
I'm going, well, first, and I had 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. I had to pack up all my stuff. I had to go to University of Alabama. I had to put together something for 2 classes, and it was
Wow.
all this kind of stuff. No, it was really. When I look back on it, it was really too much, but it was a great experience. It really was a great experience.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, but I had 2 weeks, and it was Zaya. And he said something to me because I had never thought about it before. And he said, "No, I've always seen you as a teacher." I said, "Yeah."
Who said that?
Zaya to me.
Really?
"I've always seen you as a teacher." I'm going, I hadn't, but So anyway,
we have this love-hate relationship with Isaiah.
yes, we do.
He's dead, isn't he?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He died when he was 68.
Oh, that's right.
It's when I saw the picture on your wall, I thought about the picture he had of the little girl being escorted by the troops.
Troopers,
The,
the state troopers.
What's the name of that artist?
Ruby.
No.
Yeah, but she's the girl.
She's Ruby.
Ruby.
Right, Ruby.
That's right. Wow, that goes way back.
Yeah, which he took. The only thing he took when I became director, he refused. He said it was his or whatever. And we both said, "You can't do that. That's part of the center." He took it.
Did he?
And in one of our times when we were having great difficulties, I went over. I actually told me to come. I went over to his house to talk because we were having a lot of problems. So I was in his little office at the house, and I happened to look up in the ceiling. I don't know if I was just getting disgusted with or rolling my eyes or whatever, but I looked at the ceiling, and that's where it was. And I really almost went off, saying, "You took this from the center.
The picture?
And you're not even looking at it. It's way up there, and nobody can see it."
Oh my gosh.
I really wanted to say something, but we're having a rocky time. So I said, let this go. Let this go right now. So yeah, we did have a love-hate relationship. There are many things I really appreciate about him.
Well, that's true. And I talk about him a lot too. First of all, he taught me how to preach.
Well, he did a good job.
Not the homiletics of preaching, but the heart of preaching, which is you preach what you have experienced, sort of what you say.
Yes.
You don't preach from a book. You don't preach. Sermons are not made up.
Right.
They're expressions of what you've lived.
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the many things he taught me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you invited to his funeral?
That was very sad. They didn't invite me. I think I knew about it, so I decided to go. A very small turnout. I don't know if you know, it was at Pinker's Church. And Hector, it's really very sad because there are only about 25 people there. They could have held it. They could have held it at the church for today. Actually, it'd been good.
That's all we could say.
It was funny because he had told me when I was in Ohio, and we were still having it pretty good. He had told me that if he passed, he wanted me to do his eulogy. So, of course, none of them contacted me because I was on the outs by that time. And I think, was Ron Swisher? Yeah, Ron Swisher had turned to me and said, "Oh, I thought you were supposed to do the eulogy." And I just Ron Swisher.
Oh,
but Lakey was there, and Lakey was there. J. Alfred Smith Sr. I think that's about it. Pinker did the eulogy. Paul
Pinker did?
was there.
Pinker. Uh-huh.
Well, it was at his church. It was at
right.
So that's what. But yeah, it was really kind of sad. In fact, a lot of the artists that he had supported, they were not there. I think they had Veronica Tyler that they flew in from New York and some other people.
That's really sad.
It was. I felt for him because he had touched a lot of people.
Well, he had withdrawn so much. And of course,
he was young in age.
No, he developed some dementia. No, what do you call it?
paranoia. Paranoia.
Yeah.
He was. Yeah, you hit it right on the nose. He became very paranoid. And that's what I think in a lot of relationships with him, he became very paranoid. Um, and in a way, I don't know what's the difference between paranoia and narcissism. Um, but there was a lot of that also. But yeah, he was paranoid.
I never understood that, Dorsey, because I know he was your Timothy and I was his second Timothy. And we were the closest ones to him, of
Yes.
everybody in the group,
Yes.
except for his groupies.
Yes.
And so,
But he started divorcing us from that. What happened was, as you know, and I remember the time you got on my case. Remember when we were going across country and we went to New York? That's when Angela Davis was on the run or whatever. And they had captured her, and he had said something about where they found her. And I was disagreeing with him. I said, oh, I thought it was at blah, blah, blah. And I said, Hector, wasn't it at, you go, oh no, I'm not going to get in the midst of you and your little thing against us. No, I'm not going to get in it. No. But yeah,
right.
it was, he began to, what happened is because the groupie, when we were there, let me put it this way, he could accept criticism. And people would, I criticize, you know that. I would say things to him all the time, and he'd get angry, whatever, but I would say them or whatever. And he actually liked a lot of that. In fact, Hurstville complimented me once. You were not there, but he was something he was dictating to me. Whatever.
Yeah.
And he was, pacing back and forth and looking up. And so, do you have that? I said, do I have what you dictated? I said, the 2 words that you had dictated in the last 5 minutes? Yes, I have those. I said, I don't have the pregnant impotent pauses. I don't have the glances in the sky. But the 2 words that you have dictated in the last 5 minutes, yes, I have them. And he turned, and Hurstville came to me and said, you are so good for him, But then that all changed. So he could accept that kind of stuff. But what happened with the groupies was that they idolized. I loved him. I did not idolize them, and they did. And so it became a point where you could say nothing because they did everything for him. You cannot say anything, and they started controlling. So you'd call to the house, they would pick up the phone or whatever and answer. He's not in.
Was he a National Baptist minister?
No, he had his own congregation, which is based on Dr. Thurman. He had pastored a congregational church. Not pastor, he was on the staff.
His daddy was Methodist.
He was Methodist.
He sounded more like
he had pastored just briefly at South Berkeley. Not pastored, he was on the staff at South
UCC.
Oh.
But But it was one of the things that I thought was very sad because, well, I was talking about earlier in terms of community, he cut off things that were very important to him in terms of discipline, the critique. And so he became very insulated, and they did not help. Whatever he wanted, they would jump and do it. Whatever, even though they were professionals themselves, they had seminary degrees, some of them. It was like living for him. And I told him once that you can't do that.
They didn't have a life. In the last month, I called several times to the house, never got through him. Finally, when he was in the hospital, I called directly to the hospital. I don't even know how I found out he was in the hospital. And I did talk to him.
Oh.
And he was sort of surprised, and I was sort of surprised, But that was it. After that, nothing.
Well, it's interesting because when he was in the hospital for the kidney transplant, I did not know either. But I called. I said, well, it's probably at where. So I called. Nobody told me where it was. So I called the hospital, and Jen White picked up the phone, and I said, hello, and she recognized my voice and hung up the phone. And so I tried to call back, on his deathbed, although we did not know he was on his deathbed, when he was at Kaiser. I actually called him one day, and I was on the phone, and I said to him, well, oh, he was just, so after all the mess, I thought, but oh, Dorsey, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's good. He said, oh, I said, I would like to come by. Would be okay to come in. He said, oh yeah. He said, well, you don't have to rush. He said, I'll be here for a few days. So, this is, I'll be here. And I said, okay. And then he said that, oh, Countess was here. He said, Countess, he said, Dorsey, tell Dorsey what happened. Oh, that a nurse had just come in and wanted to do a procedure. So he said, oh, I guess I need to leave. This nurse wants to do a procedure. So I said, okay, fine. And Barbara called me that night and said that Dr. Williams said, which is, I later found out it wasn't true, probably. Do not call again, do not come by until you bring back the, what you're saying, the stolen material or something like that. What happened was I took material, which was right from the center when it closed. Because if you're a nonprofit and you go out of business, the money, not the money even, the artifacts don't go to you personally. They're supposed to go to another nonprofit. And he had them to come over and take all the stuff out or whatever, and they forgot a couple of things, which I thought were very important archivally. And so I kept them. And then they finally realized, I guess, that, oh, there was something missing and that I had taken them. So even when I was being installed, after installed, his lawyer sent me a letter talking about I need to return the stolen material. Oh, no, they wrote it to the chair, the chair of the deacon board, of the board, saying that your pastor had stolen material from a blah, 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 and he needed to return it and so on. And I just said, forget them. I'm not doing anything like that. So it's at the African American Library. And in fact, I've seen it. There's a W.H. Williams file. They categorized all this stuff and so on. And that's because I took it over there. And they were, so that's what she said. Don't until you bring back what you, and so I said, fine, I'm not going to go to see him. He died that Friday, or the Saturday morning.
Wow.
And to be honest, I wanted to say later, he was in room 726. And I should have said, Barbara, don't fool with what's between the two of us. You don't understand it. And he's in my room. 726 is my birthday, July 26th. So he's under my birthday. So don't fool with what you don't understand. But she did that, and I didn't go by. And one of the reasons I didn't go by, because if I'd gone by, I wanted to go when Countess was there, because Countess was not as reactionary as some of them. And I knew if I had gone by there, they would try to block me from going in to see him, all of this kind of stuff. Things had gotten that bad.
Which Countess? Young Countess or old Countess?
Countess, the former wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was there when I called. I mean, they had said so many things about me that are just not true. So that, Countess didn't, until we talked later, she did not understand what had happened to me, because from their point of view, I was the one who had betrayed them, and not his.
Well, the gatekeepers kept the gates shut.
Yeah. So that was a very sad part of my life, really, because the relationship we'd had, he was my primary mentor, past, and for it to end that way. But the good thing is, again, he and I had that good conversation, very brief, but there was no animosity in his voice. It was like he was glad to hear me, to see that I had called, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was there at the funeral. I don't think Peker did a very good job of eulogizing him, but anyways.
Well, Frank wouldn't know how to do it.
Thank you. And he did not really know, Keziah.
No, he didn't.
When he started talking about some of the things, I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
He spent most of his time being jealous of Hosea.
Yeah.
That's
So
too
anyway.
bad. Well, Dorsey, I tell you, brings back good, but look where you are, huh?
Yeah.
You survived.
I'm grateful. I keep saying I am grateful for the experiences I've had. I'm grateful to, even at PSR, when they honored me a few years ago with the, I just could not believe it. I said it's because all the professors who were here when I was here are dead. And so the new administration has no idea of what, you know. But really, you and Gene Farlow, Isaiah was at the center. It was just really just remarkable. And I don't know if I ever told you, Gene Farlow left the center, not because of, he had come to the point where he could not work with Isaiah anymore.
Really?
He told me that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was surprised when he died. He died so young.
Yeah. And Isaiah did not go to the service.
Really?
Yeah. He did not go to Baber's service. He didn't go to anybody's service.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Well, you know, Farlow and I and that woman from the GTU put the center together.
see, I didn't know that until later. I
Yeah.
didn't know you. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the three of us modeled out the center. And of course, nobody got the credit except you know who.
Right. Well, in fact, I was very bothered because later on in my PhD program, I got out of it because of the racism. But I realized later, I could have used all those classes that I taught for Hosea.
So,
I could use those as part of my language requirements and for my own PhD program. But he was listed as the professor. I did the teaching. This is the PhD. I did all the teaching.
I
but my
got to
name
check
is not
on our
listed.
granddaughter.
Oh, good.
I'll talk to you
Great
later.
seeing you. Okay,
Yeah.
take care. So it was just like, you know, I taught all those classes. In fact, there've been a couple of people, Noel, and so said, you're my teacher. I'm going, was I your teacher? Oh yeah, that's right. I did all that work, but it was under Isaiah's name. And so, I mean, even if he had, I think, had listed as co-teacher or assistant, it could have helped. But I did all of that, and you know, the work at the Post newspaper for Tom, just everything, and so it's kind of sad. It was very sad when we were no longer speaking.
you know what's really sad is I don't know why I found a link for Hosea. And then there's a whole bunch of documents that are.
That's what I was talking about. Those are his papers, yes.
And I started going through and they had records, monthly records of everything.
Right.
And I said, gee, this is really interesting. It took, I don't know how many pages to find any mention of Farlow, any mention of Lopez. And no, we didn't exist.
No.
We didn't exist.
I looked through that. That's what I'm talking about, because I gave those records to, again, the African American Culture Center, and they did that. So they did that work. So I did the same thing as you did one day. I said, well, what if they have anything on Hosea? So I did. I go, wow, all this kind of stuff. At the very end, I guess when they mentioned that I became director, Dorsey became director. And then it was basically, and the center closed, and that was about it. Dorsey became director, and the center closed. It was not quite like that, but you know, it was, yeah. So.
My goodness sake. What was really fun is in the early stages, when he was planning his classes, he would say, you know, it'd be fun to teach a class like XYZ or whatever it was, right? And he said, put together an outline for me.
Yeah, right.
So I would.
Yeah.
And then he would flesh it out, right? But again, I'm glad I didn't have to put him on my resume as a reference.
Yeah, but that happened with me with a couple of those courses too, and you just did it, and he just went with it, and so on. So, and I guess as a student at that time, I guess I just thought that that's the way things were done, or whatever. I didn't really raise a lot of questions, because I think the other thing is I love the center so, and what it stood for, and my thing is, or if I can help the developer, then fine. I was not looking for, but after a while, when I look back on it, when I see that those things could have been, some recognition could have been helpful for me and some of the things I want to do, that's when I started, you know, he should have known better. And even going to Alabama, I think he could have been more helpful in terms of guidance once I got
Mhm.
there even. But anyway,
Well, Dorsey, if it hadn't been for my time at the center, I wouldn't have become as multiracial uh, in my justice work as I am, or as I was. I'm retired now.
right.
I wouldn't have. This is the crack of me. Some of those folk, like somebody said, I'm always lifting up Howard Thurman. Well, I'm also, and it's hard to do in the context. They don't know my credentials. And Keziah said another thing when I was moving from Berkeley to LA.
Mhm.
He said, "You've had some incredible experiences in relationship with the African American community.
Mm.
That will not transfer down to Los Angeles.
Mm.
You'll be starting at zero."
Wow.
And you know what? That was so valuable because I saw other colleagues who came from other places who immersed in a multiracial African American, and they'd come in assuming that they had the appropriate passport and citizenship, and they totally bombed.
Right.
Totally bombed. So that was great advice.
Yeah, he had some great insights at times.
And I would never have known Olive Schreiner. I never would have known County Cullen.
Right.
I would never have spent hours and hours studying the Harlem Renaissance.
Right. Yeah.
So,
as I said, we had some really great times there, and that's why it was so sad the way things ended.
yep.
But it became, after a couple of things, I don't know what happened. And he also became, well, there's several things. For example, I remember once, oh no, when he was still, I guess, at the, what was he at? A couple of things happened. I was director of the center at that time. I remember this person who was head of the YMCA asked me to speak for, I don't know how we met, for Black History or something like that. Right? And I said, I actually had a sort of a tentative conflict, wasn't sure. I sort of said yes to something. And so I said, actually, I sort of have a conflict. I said, but why don't you ask Dr. Williams, Dr. Zion Williams to speak? I said, he's excellent, whatever. I think I said, be sure not to tell him that you asked me first, or I referred to you, just, or you can say that you asked me and I referred, whatever, but
right.
Don't let him know that I was asked first. And so Keziah took the engagement, and the fellow called me, and he was shaken up. This is a couple of weeks later because I think Keziah said something about no fee or a little fee, and he was adamant. He pushed him in terms of how much money he was supposed to get from them, and they hadn't paid his fee and so on. Now that kind of stuff also happened at the University of Alabama.
Wow.
When I invited him, I pushed this because the students didn't know, but I pushed for him to come as our speaker for, I think it was Martin Luther King, Black History, something like that. And I told him he'd accepted, and I went through the proper channel. The students were trying to do this kind of thing, and at the last minute, Keziah said no.
Oh my God.
Because the university wasn't paying him enough money. I can't remember what the fee was, almost $2,000. But the point is, we might know Keziah, but the university is not going to put him in the same category as Jesse Jackson. So he can't draw the same kind of fee that some of these other people draw. But that's what he was demanding.
Oh my
He did the same thing with Lakey. Lakey told us later he did the same thing with him. And Lakey pleaded. Lakey invited him to come to Tulsa. They thought they had everything worked out. And at the last minute, Keziah threw a fee on them. And he was sort of saying, well, we're going to try it, blah, blah, blah. And they couldn't come up with what he wanted. And he just told them, forget it. So he did things like that. And one time I was, during the first Persian Gulf War, I was one of the main speakers. That's the first Persian Gulf War. I was UC Berkeley, all these different other places and so on.
Yeah.
And I went over once and to his house. I think we were having one of those things again. And he said something, but it was not. I look back on it and try to accept it as a compliment. But it was something like, well, you are, I guess you're pretty proud of yourself, all the speaking that you're doing around here. And I didn't know how to take it, you know.
Wow.
I mean, I could have, it'd been different if you said, I'm really proud of you, you know,
Right.
that you're something, and you're my protege or whatever. But it was, I'm going, that doesn't sound right. Is he upset or whatever? But it just,
Wow.
they ruined him. And what anyone said, they were a cult. And that's
Oh, they
the
were.
right way to put it.
They
It
were.
was a cult.
They were. And, you know, part of me thinks that they pushed him into the impresario mode.
Mhm.
He always loved that,
Oh yeah, right.
but they wanted him full time on that rather than the center, because the center could still be there, Dorsey, if it had been fed appropriately by Haziah, and if he had been able to listen to a bunch of us
But he
in
wouldn't.
terms of setting the future for that
But see,
institution.
that's why Farno left, though. He couldn't have stayed. Isaiah was not a person to deal with confrontations. That's why Farno left. Farno told me that he left because Isaiah was always demanding. Isaiah wouldn't go to the meetings necessarily, but always demanded Farno to go to these meetings at the GTU.
Right.
And come back with this. This is what you were. And Farno just got tired of it. He just said, I just got tired of his demands on me to go to these meetings and produce these kinds of things. And I found out later, Isaiah did not like confrontation. You can back him down. I mean, for us, he sounded very militant at times, and blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, no, he would not confront people at all. And even one year, his mother was there. This is when I was, I think, working on the PhD. Yeah. And that's when they still met. Well, you realize the GTU board met where we were at the center. And Stanford, Lolita was away for some reason, so I was staffing the office. And so Stanford came, because Stanford was further along in the PhD program. I just finally came into it or whatever. And so, and I told Stanford that I just sent in my, it was request, my paper on language or whatever. And the process, the GTU process, you submit it to the dean, and then the dean will look at it and get back to you, and you have this conversation and so on. And so Stanford was down there because he was up to sort of defend whatever he had put forth. And he came up to the mezzanine and said, Dorsey, he said, your language is on the agenda. I said, it can't be, Stanford. I just submitted it to, and he said, I know that. He said, it is on the agenda. So then he came back up and said they had now moved it to the next week. So that's not the one. Actually, they were talking about the center. The center was on the agenda too at one point. And his mother was there. And I guess he told his mother that they're going to be discussing the center at the GTUs, whatever. And she basically said, well, why aren't you there? He told me this. Why aren't you there? He said, oh, Dorsey's there. He can handle it.
Jeez.
So, I mean, my point is, at that time, he was still director. This is your center. Yes, some white folks are going to ask you some questions and push you on some things, but he was not.
No.
He canceled a class. We had worked together, three of us, to bring the center back when I became director. We'd had a little staff meeting, and we decided to teach a class. In a way, he was right because we didn't talk about money, but we had talked with the new dean coming in. And part of my thing is we're trying to reestablish a relationship because they were getting no money from GTU. And so we had set up the class to start on a certain day. And right before class was supposed to, not right before, because he still had maybe an hour or so, Isaiah called and said, cancel the class. I said, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean cancel the class? He said, they haven't given us any money.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm not going to teach a class. And we can't teach a class. Those people don't give. And I was saying, I hear you, but we didn't discuss. This was not what we had taught, with the dean, and he said, I'm sorry, he said, cancel the class because of this. I'm going, I said, then you need to come by and explain why we're canceling this class. He said, fine. He didn't show.
No, no.
So I was left there canceling the class, although I did disagreed with canceling the class. Although I, in the back of my mind, I did hear him. I did, and my point is, we should have thought about that.
Right.
And then at one point, I had worked with the seminary presidents, and at a point where they said, let's talk. And we're having a meeting with the Star King, and let's see a budget from you. Okay. So I put together a budget. We put together a budget, so which I thought was decent or whatever. And I was telling Keziah about the meeting, or I told him, and he wanted to see the budget. He dropped the budget, so he wanted to work. Okay, fine. So I took the budget to him, and he returned the budget with not just what I was saying we needed on an annual basis, but he was demanding that they pay all the years, him back for all the years he had supported the center without the help of the GTU.
Oh my gosh.
And these, most of these are new presidents, okay?
Right, no history.
No history. And I should have just not had that as part of it. I was not at that time. I guess I was shocked, and I actually presented that. I should have, when I look back on it, I should have just presented what I had presented initially. And then I could have told them they went with that, but they wouldn't go with what he was, whatever. But I didn't. I presented because he said, no, this is, you got to. So I did. And they sort of looked at me. How can you come? And so what I'm saying, that put me in bad light.
Of course it did.
Because they didn't know that, that Keziah had done that. I had presented a decent budget to them, which I think they could have gone along with. But again, this kind of thing kept. So.
You build credibility, and it was knocked down every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what, Dorsey? We should have had this talk a year after Keziah died, or maybe even before he died. The debriefing. I'm glad we're debriefing that.
Right.
Who gives a poop, right?
Right.
We went in our directions, and we did what we did, and we did it well. So
yes, we did. Yeah, and I'm proud of that. I'm glad for that. And again, without the center, I would not have met you. And I
that's true. That's true.
Cherish you and your friend and your mentoring, really. So,
Dorothy, do you remember coming to my poor little goodbye event at First Congregational Church? Do you remember that? Or were you here then, maybe? That would have been in 81, maybe? 80, 81.
No, I was, 80. That's when I was, I don't remember going to Ohio, but I'm trying to remember.
Anyway,
I went to, yeah.
Some people decided to do this, and so we held it at First Congregational Church, down, the big one. And just a few people, maybe 40 people showed up. And, it was very nice. Somebody had prepared a nice dinner or whatever. And I got up and I thanked people for being here. And then all of a sudden, Gene Farlow gets up, goes to the mic, and he was furious. He said, I cannot believe that after the years of service that this man has given to us and to our communities, you just sit there, don't even have the appropriate words, and just let him go. He was really mad.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Oh, bless his heart. Oh.
Well, that was a great benediction to that event.
Oh, that's great. That is really great.
And I don't think Keziah was there.
Probably he was not good at going to honor other people. I found that out. There was a time when Ray Richardson was being honored, and we talked about. We told Keziah, Ray is being, and he goes, she's been honored enough. And he said it in such a way, and you don't need to be going to that either.
Oh my gosh.
And was it Barbara Lee had the Shirley Chisholm thing? Shirley Chisholm was coming down, and Barbara Lee was introducing her. In fact, later on, Barbara asked me why I didn't come.
Seriously.
Yeah, she said, "Why weren't you at the?" And I made up something I didn't want to say because again, I should have been mature enough to know that whether or not Haziah said doggone, I can, I should go, but I was still under that thing, I guess, of not trying to upset. I don't know why I listened to him, but I did, and I didn't go.
What is remarkable, Dorsey, is here's a man who I think valued Howard Thurman, learned a lot from Howard Thurman, but not the basic goodness of Howard Thurman. You know, Howard would have been glad to see what you've become. He would have gloried in your glory.
Well, Haziah would do that sometimes, like when I was away. Well, in Alabama, he was my champion. He would write, and they would talk about how wonderful work was and blah, blah, blah. I was really, but it was working with him when I came back. We were in the same space. I guess he could see what I was doing, whatever. I think the other thing that happened with Haziah, to be quite honest, not just with me, but with you and everybody, and with Jay Alford and Hurstville, I think Haziah realized that he was, when you look at the Black preachers, Jay Alford, blah, 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 and all these people, I think he became jealous. I think that he felt as though he was brighter than all of them, and he was. That he was brighter, and yet they at that time were getting more recognition. I mean, Hurstville is bishop of this kind of thing, and I think he had a hard time dealing with that. I think that he felt as though he was, as bright as king or whatever, and I think he felt he needed more recognition, and he wasn't getting it. And I think one of the things the concerts gave him, pulling out, he could brag that he was the only major Black impresario in the nation. So that gave him something that he could look at rather than just the fact that he's at the GTU and not really having to deal with funding issues, not getting this kind of thing. I think he really became quite jealous of all of them, Jay Alford and Hurstville in particular. And I think he felt as though he should receive more recognition than he did nationally. I think when I first came to this, he was getting a lot of speaking engagements. And I sympathize with him to a certain extent because he brought Kelly Miller Smith, he brought all these people, and a lot of them did not reciprocate. They did not ask him then to come and speak or whatever. And I think that hurt him. Although Kelly did. He came, he spoke for Kelly, and he spoke for Major Jones. But I think that he wanted and needed a larger stage because I think he knew that he had a lot to say, and he did. And I think that that's why, again, when something else came along, where I'm the only one, or whatever, it was very important to him. I think he felt that he was not recognized for his brilliance in ways that he should have been.
Oh, I agree.
Now, one of the things also happened, this is when I was back, I guess, I was director. I asked him because I thought he was so with the today's artists and so on. But I just raised a question with him once. I said, if some prestigious church back east, I think that's when maybe Riverside would be interested in you and would call you to be the pastor of this church, I said, would you consider going back? He said, I'd be gone in a minute.
Really? Really?
Yeah. That's beyond the concerts, all that kind of stuff, because again, I think that would have a significant pulpit nationally is something he would have wanted. And he would have been great at it too, in terms of sermons and so on. So that's why, again, I think that he felt he should have been known nationally, let me put it that way. And he wasn't, not really. During a time period, yes, he was getting a lot of engagements, but he was not a national figure in the way he wanted to be a national figure.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think part of that was his own inability to take advantage of those things.
Mhm.
I think, for one, I know he was asked to do some writing,
Mhm.
to put some sort of book proposal together.
Right.
He never
Okay.
could. He couldn't do it. I don't think he established appropriate relationships with people nationally,
I agree with that.
because, well, first of all, he demeaned most of them. You know, he always had something critical, if not negative, to say about national leadership. So, you know, I was surprised he didn't become a national figure, to tell the truth. I was very surprised.
I think, but you just put your finger on something which I think is very important when you were saying they asked him about this book project and he's working on it. Isaiah did not have discipline. That's what Chet Tolson said. And he was brilliant in the classroom. He wasn't very disciplined. And I think, I never thought of those. I go, he's right. Because, I mean, he would come to the classroom and he'd be brilliant for a short span, but in terms of a whole semester and coming every week,
No way.
That was not his thing. I don't know how he did it. I mean, he taught at San Mateo College or whatever, at sociology when I first met him. I think I don't know how he did that, but after a while, he was not a person. That's why he had us do all of his work. He didn't have the discipline to stick to it and see things to the end.
And that's why he was so enamored of the Harvard 3-day course seminars.
Yes. The Harvard?
Yep, that's where he got the idea. They used to have these 3-day seminars, which counted as full, first full quarter grade.
Oh, I thought he came up with that on his own. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, Dorsey, I tell you,
yeah. Well,
I'm so glad we connected, and
right.
Obviously now that we have, I don't let go.
Okay, this is great.
I'm too damn old to worry about those things. And you were really precious in my journey at the center.
I appreciate that so much. I don't know. I really do. Yeah.
Because you were the same person. You were the smartest person there.
Thank you.
And that didn't hurt because we needed him. No, what a brilliant concept that with different kind of realities, or who knows, the center could have become a giant.
Well, I know it's getting late, but remember when you had put together that other idea? We put together another idea for a center for an institute. So I think you were going to be vice president. And it was the center, I guess, for urban black stuff, but we were talking about expanding it, and you had worked out.
We presented it at Yacht Huts.
Yeah.
We presented that concept at Yacht Huts, bringing in all of the elements that Isaiah was interested in, the music, all of those things under one structure.
Yes. And you worked on that.
Oh yeah, worked my butt off.
And then nothing.
Nothing. That was the last time we ever heard of it.
Because we were talking about, even at that time, because Stanford was already in the PhD, but that we'd have that component, the center, we'd have these young scholars like Stanford and maybe Stanford and I would do this kind of thing. And it was a brilliant concept. And nothing.
Nothing. Well. Well, Dorsey, I gotta go put my grandchild to sleep. She won't go to sleep unless I tell her stories.
Good. And I'm going to head back across the bay.
Yeah. Oh, are you?
We're at the church.
Oh, bless your heart, Dorsey. I didn't mean to keep you up so late.
No, that's okay. It's fine.
And thank you. This was brilliant. You were wonderful. And Beth Petite, the young woman who asked you, share us who you are, and oh my gosh, I didn't know half of the stuff you shared. But that really cemented the way you brought in cone. And I really like the way you established the rationale for a cone even being possible.
Okay, thank
That
you.
was brilliant. That was brilliant.
Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, Dorsey, we'll be in
Yes.
touch, and I'm sure
Yes.
you know you got to learn how to say no to Lynn.
Well, I can't say no to you, so I know.
Well, that makes it worse. That makes it worse. All right, my friend. We'll talk soon, and you be well.
Bless you and thank you. I'm so glad we're back in communication.
Absolutely. And you know, say hello to Carl.
I will.
We didn't get to know each other very well, but I always admired him so much.
I mentioned that to him the last time after we talked, and he was very happy to hear from you. He remembers you quite well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right. Good night.
Take care.
Be well.